Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
Let's talk about equilibrium. What does equilibrium mean? What does F.M. Alexander say about this in his books? And what's your understanding of how equilibrium relates to the model of good use or to the model that we've been talking about in the last few episodes?
Yes, well, the subject about what Alexander thinks or says about equilibrium is very, very vast. So I need to enter by a small door and start to open the field so that people can get orientated and see what how his thinking goes, because it's quite deep. And so I want to enter by a very small door, and it's especially a door where most of the time I've heard other teachers commenting that there was no such thing as a wrong feeling during a lesson. Uh, you will see that if you start using a model, as we were discussing modeling and how to represent what it is we want, then you will find that it's possible to see that Alexander is really meaning his words. So I'm going back to a picture. Sentence we have already seen, but there are always things that you can, in fact, discover if you really go to the details. So that's what I want to perform today: analysis of a text. So once again, we have the universal constant in living. It's the last book of Alexander. It's not the young Alexander. It's the Alexander that is already at the end of his career. This is 42. And he says, then as to the idea that it is helpful to know and to be able to acquire the right position in, say, standing, sitting, or in any other activity, let us for a moment consider the facts. To pass from wrong to right conditions associated with posture and functioning means change. And if a person is to make this change successfully, it must be by a gradual process of change from day to day, so that the effect of the readjustment of the bony structure, the abdominal viscera, the vital organs, the interference with the habitual sense of equilibrium, and the disturbing influence of experience in doing what feels wrong may not retard the process. So that is the sentence I want to discuss, because, of course, you have seen there is this idea that the interference with the habitual sense of equilibrium may retard the learning process. So, well, at first it's quite a funny sentence, because at his end of his career, Alexander is clearly stating that we have to learn how to, well, improve our position or postures. It's not just a question of imagining things. We also want that in practice, if you, for example, analyze how you're sitting or how you're standing or how you're walking, well, you want to see progress. The obtaining the right. There was this sentence in Man's Supreme Inheritance where Alexander was discussing the primary principle in attaining the correct standing position, and we are like here, like 35 years later, and he's also talking of the right position. So there has been no change. Well, in my eyes, is always discussing the capacity that we have to organize change associated with posture and functioning. And the first thing I want to say about this is that when you look at the start of the second paragraphs in this presentation, it says that to pass from right to wrong to right condition of use, or right, you understand right condition associated with posture and functioning. We are discussing use. We are discussing the decision the person makes regarding how we are organizing the parts, and how the person is able or not to stick to the decisions. It's one thing to make decision, it's another to stick to these decisions. You may have heard some ideas like lengthening the back, like having the neck free or the head forward and up or the knees forward and away. And of course, you can think about it and decide that, wow, that could be interesting to make this decision. But then you need something to control that you're effectively obeying the decision you've yourself made. It's not because you make a decision that everybody knows that. You know, every start of the year, you make decisions, resolution, we call them, that you're going to not do something or to do something. And well, in the end, you find that after a month, you've lost it. You've gone back to your habits of mind and habits of body. So when Alexander says change, I tend to understand change very practically. To pass from right to wrong to right condition associated with use and functioning, we need movements. There are different parts. They are set in a certain way. The person may be arching the back, shortening the back, maybe unduly lifting the front part of the chest, maybe protruding the abdomen. All these sorts of things, for me, are movements. So the question is, how is the person to stop these movements? Alexander explained that these movements are based on a system of guidance, that is the guidance by feeling. I feel what I need to do, which suppose that I know what I am doing and that I know what I want to do. Alexander comes into this scene and, well, says no to both ideas. We don't exactly know what we want to do, and we don't know what exactly we are doing with the different movements of the different parts of the mechanisms. It's as simple as that. So when we want to change, so we go to a specialist that supposedly knows what is correct use. But then there is still a problem because even if that were true, even if there were some people with their hands capable to, in fact, feel when you're not organizing the structure properly, and were also able, which is even more complex, to transmit to you the power to make decisions. Because, of course, they can make you feel what is the correct organization in certain activities, but that does not mean that you will be able to use that material of the lesson that you're given in order to, when you're on your own, when you want to, of course, change, and you have to understand that we are dealing with a process of change. If you're still guided by your feeling, that's very difficult to imagine that you will be able, because you have felt once a correct organization or a few times a correct organization, that you're going to be able to suppress well, the feeling that you feel and you have felt all your life that have, in fact, guided you into the wrong habits that you demonstrate every time you stand, sit, or walk. I always had this problem with Alexander's ways of teaching with the hands. Because if you teach with the hands and you transmit a feeling, then the person is still using feeling in order to guide the different movements. So there is a need of something else. And there are hints at this something else in Alexander's books, but they are just hints. So for example, there is a hint in the very sentence we were looking at. Yes, a gradual process of change, but day to day, day-to-day change. And there are going to be effects of this change. So if you make new movements, of course, there are going to be effects. And one effect is, of course, an interference with the habitual sense of equilibrium. Every single pupil that has lessoned with me discover what we mean by interference with the habitual sense of equilibrium. It's very important because it is a way to understand what Alexander means by faulty sensory appreciation. There is many people that believe that they are feeling what it is. I know everything about my body. And so it's very interesting to practice some procedures where we are going to directly connect with this idea of interference with the habitual sense of equilibrium. So the person has a sense of when she's in equilibrium and when she's not. It's absolutely obvious. You can make a simple experiment. It's called, in the Alexander technique, it's called the wall procedure. Apparently, Alexander requested the student of the first training course to practice the wall procedure every single day. And so it's Marjorie Barlow that is reporting this. I haven't got the quote exact yet, but I can furnish it if you need to see it. And so I started to inquire into this whole procedure because nowadays I don't think that any teacher practice the whole procedure every day, and I haven't seen it taught in different training schools. So it's very possible that you may never have heard of it. And so the first time you're going to discover what is the whole procedure, you're going to be very surprised because that procedure is dealing with the exact subject of the interference with the habitual sense of equilibrium. So it's a safe procedure to practice. You can even practice it at home. And the conditions are simple. So let's have a look at the conditions. We see that we have a person that is standing, yes, a student, and we start to imagine that there are bony parts inside the flesh. I want the person to start to imagine that bony parts, yes, are quite interesting to tell us what it is we are doing and what it is what we're not. And for the simple reason that it's possible to control parts before and after movements. It's possible to control the spatial position of parts. Muscles, ligaments, fascia are nearly impossible to control. Muscle is more of the same because their form is so complex that it's first of all difficult to assess what is the state of the object we are considering, and second, that object shape is going to completely change during and after a change of position, which is during a movement. So muscle is going to stretch, is going to bulge, it's not the same before and after the movement. So it's very, very difficult to assess anything. There are some people that imagine that with their hands they can feel extraordinary change of tone and all this. Well, it's really difficult to believe. There are 700 muscles in the anatomical structure. We know that all these muscles are, in fact, more or less embroidered into the fascia. It's very, very difficult to make a clear statement of what is really happening. With bone, it's very simple. With bone, you can say when the top of the sternum is further back than the bottom of the sternum. Alexander used the expression unduly lifting the front part of the chest. And so then you imagine that the chest is a rib cage, well, that has a particular shape. It's made of different bones, and we can check how that anatomy object is behaving during movements. We can see that there are parts that are more or less solid together, and that the rib cage is in somehow a mechanism itself that can be moved in different ways. For example, it's seen that when you unduly lift the front part of the chest, you will find that the lower part of the back of the chest has a tendency to, well, be projected in a movement that make you think immediately of a rotation. So we can assume that, okay, that rotation is a change of shape in space, but it's also a change in the volume of the rib cage. You will find that the rib cage has a tendency to shorten and narrow when you do these kinds of rotation, while there are others that have a tendency to, in fact, expand the back, which is very interesting because that's where the lungs are, expand the top of the back. And we are very interested in expanding the thoracic capacity as well as lengthening the spine. So we have an object here which we can reason upon, which means that we can see what are the effects of the process of change. Let's imagine you decide that you're not going to unduly lift the front part of the chest. Well, you want to see in different gestures whether you're obeying these instructions or not. You want to see your progress in this. You want to see the progress in the capacity to make sure that the orders you're giving are followed by concrete actions. If they are not, you must ask yourself questions. You must ask yourself, why is it that I want this movement to disappear? Why is it that I'm still doing the movement? And very often, you are still doing the movement, and because this movement is associated with your sense of equilibrium. If the movement you don't want to reproduce all the time is still there after many days of really engaging the mind into organizing the movements, there is something strange. There is something that is hindering you. There is something, there is like a guidance that seems to be stronger than your mental guidance. Very interesting. So when you've discovered that you have a tendency to rotate the rib cage object, and also another one that is absolutely fundamental in the sense that is also attached to the spine, remember that the idea is to find a way to get a constant expansion of the mechanism of the torso. And we have already seen that when you're shortening the spine, you're shortening the mechanism of the torso. And this is exactly what you want to change, what the habit you want to change. So we see that the person is standing, and of course, she's rotating the rib cage and the pelvis. And when we start to imagine a series of verbal instruction that are related to means whereby movements by which we can lengthen the spine, that is, derotate the rib cage and the pelvis in opposite direction to lengthen the spine, then we find that the person has many, many difficulties, and she may even think she's doing the correct coordinations of movements, when in fact on video it seems that, of course, it's not happening. Yes, the person is not seen lengthening the back. So you must observe what is happening. And so when you observe, it's not just, I'm looking at the movements, I'm looking at something. Most often, you will see nothing. In order to observe, you need to have a plan. You need to have some form of conception of what it is you're looking at. Otherwise, you're looking at a person that has a mask on the face and is standing. Well, the use of the self is not the position, isn't it? Oh, or is it not? Well, then you think, fine, I need to get out of these empty words and start looking at how is the equilibrium. Because the equilibrium is already reasoned out by other people than me or you. There are already scientists and physicists that have looked into what is equilibrium. So then we can start use the reasoning that is applied to habitual object and machines and systems and mechanisms, and start to reason about it. And we are helped in this because when Alexander, you remember, was discussing it was 1910, he was discussing this way to obtain the correct standing position is say that the gesture starts at the ankle. I was puzzled the first time I read the sentence because in my training course, in the STAT training course, of course, we are trained to think that everything is in the head and neck relationship or somehow starting from there. And Alexander, in obtaining the correct standing position, suddenly he throws this enormous brick in the window and says, no, it starts at the ankle. So, well, yes, it could be. It could well be, because when you observe what biomechanicians discuss, and when they discuss equilibrium, well, very often they use an expression that is an inverted pendulum. And this is what you're looking at the moment. It's the simple way of discussing equilibrium. So what we have is a pendulum, but it's inverted. We call inverted pendulum because most of us we have a very fixed vision of a pendulum. We imagine a little ball that is suspended by a rope, and that is used to measure gravity and sometimes used to do some very strange kind of esoteric search or things. But in mechanics, we are not interested. In mechanics, we are interested in movements. What is going to be the movement of the system in the next second, in the next moment. And so we are interested in movements. So equilibrium is related to movements directly, and it's also related to shape. So instead of using a rope, we use here in imagination a rod, rigid structure, and we represent that the weight is not situated at the bottom of the rigid structure. There is more weight at the top than at the bottom. So then we need to imagine. So Alexander say reason out. I say sometimes imagine. Don't get me wrong. We are not imagining things that are impossible. We need to imagine something that will, in fact, connect with the facts and explain the facts. It's not imagination like, well, you know, what you would do in fantasy or in poetry or in, I don't know, somatic technique, when they use analogy that you have a balloon floating representing the head. The head is not a balloon floating. The head represents a certain amount of mass, but it's quite interesting to know that the head is more or less 1/9 of the weight of the body. When the weight of the torso is closer to 1/4 of the weight of the total body. So when you start to experiment with the pendulum idea in biomechanics, you don't consider that the head leads. What leads is the greatest mass. And so on this picture, what we see is the greatest mass in the body, as well as the head, by the way, are further forward than the center of rotation, that is the pivot of the ankle. Alexander called it the pivot. And so we suddenly see that the person has an habitual sense of equilibrium, and for her, she's perfectly placed, she's at rest, she's stable and safe, when we see that in physics, she's not. In physics, it's very strange because it looks like all the weight of the different parts above the pivot are falling. The person is certainly not falling, I can tell you. I've seen this video, and the person is standing, is fine, everything is fine. Yet, the person uses that sense of equilibrium to guide the rotation of the rib cage and the rotation of the pelvis. Simple. And then we can see that our habitual sense of equilibrium is, well, associated with the direction of the shortening of the back. That's how she feels right. For her, that is right and safe. Yes. When you say right and safe, you're touching the whole concept of morals. What is beneficial? What is what you need to cling to? So you must understand that, of course, when we are going to play with anything that involves this sense of equilibrium, that person is going to react. We are going to see many habitual reactions, and so we are going to discuss it now, because here is what the wall procedure is about. We have a person standing away from a wall, and there is a distance between the back of the heel and the wall. We absolutely want the person to be at something like, depending on the height, but 3 inches away from the wall. I will certainly ask the person to touch and make sure that the wall is there. And I will, in fact, continue during the lesson, because as soon as you have a person that is standing, the habitual position, well, express itself. The person is not just standing. She's making sure she's safe. She's making sure that she's stable. Yes. And the first thing is to ask her to imagine that, yes, we could consider that she's a pendulum, an inverted pendulum. And we would want to make an experiment and ask the person, in fact, to fall backward against the wall. Because it's a very interesting experiment. The person is going to experiment a movement, so a movement of the whole structure. It's very important in the Alexander technique, because Alexander says repeatedly that you function as a whole, and you can only change as a whole. So what better expression? When you fall backward, the whole organism, the whole systems of parts have to work together. And you will see what we mean by control of reaction. And between the A, which is the original position, and B, we have something like 45 minutes. It took 45 minutes for the pupil to start changing the rotation of the rib cage and the rotation of the pelvis. Yes. It was not immediate. It was not, that's it, the pupil was asked to fall and then she fell and that's how she fell. No. In the first place, she could not fall. In the first place, she was requested to fall, of course. And she said, "I'm falling," which is the purpose of the whole procedure. And my answer was, "No, I tell you, I am falling. I am really falling." And I was adamant that I could not approve what she was saying. And I said, "No, you're not falling. If you had been falling, you would be against the wall. You're not against the wall." "Yes, but my toes are lifting off the floor." "Yes, your toes are lifting off the floor. And what is your point?" "Well, if my toes are lifting off the floor," she said, "I am falling." "No, you're lifting your toes and yet you're not falling. If you were falling, you would be against the wall." It's like a discussion that you can have sometimes that have a strange, well, sound to it, because it seems that the two persons are not discussing the same thing. It's obvious that the person is saying that she feels that she's falling, and she's afraid of falling, apparently, even when the wall is 3 inches further back, which is not a big fall, you must admit. And the teacher is not discussing what the person feels. The teacher is just looking at an image. I am most of the time I'm 10,000 kilometers away, and so I'm looking at it and I'm saying your reaction is preventing you from falling. And so I need to explain this so that it takes time and that the person will start. "So you really want me to fall?" is the question. Very often I get that question. I say, "Yes, absolutely. I really want you to fall." It sounds, I understand that if you have never seen this kind of procedures, where the person is to respond in a certain way, and then after understanding what is requested, must comply during a certain number of seconds. The person has, I'm leaving 2 seconds for the person to fall. Of course, while the person is falling, we want her to organize the different movements of the parts. The whole idea is the question of readjustment. So we want the person to readjust the different movements she's habitually, in fact, giving consent to. So the habitual movement of rotation of the chest, the habitual movement of rotation of the pelvis are pointed out to the pupil, and the pupil is requested to command either an inhibition of the movement, so stop moving. We don't want to see, for example, the rib cage rotate backward at the top. Or we can ask also for the person to command the opposite movement to the one that is habitually seen when the person is reacting to the same stimulation. So for example, we can ask the person, you see, if you don't want your buttocks to touch the wall first, you need to change the rotation of your pelvis. So we are going to give you a few anatomical landmarks, a few bony parts that you can touch, and you're going to direct your mind and say before counting to 3, so that you're counting 1 when you start and 3 when you touch the wall. We want you to, in fact, plan, program the movement of the different parts of the bone, so that the rotation is going to be the opposite of the one you do when you react according to what you feel, according to the somatic sense, to the feeling sense, to your what they call embodied cognition, which is simply the habit of feeling something when doing a particular activity. So when you do a particular activity which is falling backward, you tend to feel always the same thing, and you want you want most of the time to reproduce that feeling, even if it's suddenly demonstrated to you with the help of graphics, with the help of your video in action, that your habitual feeling and habitual way of responding is not beneficial. It's very strange, but even when it's not beneficial, we still like to, to stick to the old feeling. Well, when you stick to the old feeling, you cannot stick to your decisions. The decisions you, agreed to implement when you were falling. So the person suddenly is confronted with the fact that she has a tendency when she falls to react in the same way, and the lifting of the front part of the chest, for example, is absolutely part of it, as much as the shortening of the back, as much as the protruding abdomen. It's all connected. And the person will start to discover that if she tries to change one of these movements that are part of the theory, then the other ones are exaggerated. And the only way to start changing the way of touching the wall is to start working as a whole and directing the movement as a whole. So the person cannot become a fantastic adept at not lifting the front part of the chest unless she learns how not to project the pelvis forward. It's exactly the expression of concerted activity that Alexander uses in his books. So the person is suddenly confronted with your habitual sense of equilibrium. And it's quite disturbing. It's very disturbing to suddenly realize that all her adult life, she has, in fact, trusted a feeling sense of when she was safe. And in fact, that feeling sense is responsible for knees problems, for back problems, for concentration problems. It's very, very strange. It's all related. and then the person will have to, well, remember every single time that she has habits of mind. She has the habit of trusting to her feeling sense. She has the habits of going back to these feelings that are associated with the activity before, even before remembering that she has entered a new process of conscious guidance in which, oh yeah, she must reason out that there are movements she wants and movements she doesn't. And when we want to define the movement we want and the movement we don't want, of course, we started with a model, with a very simplistic representation of equilibrium. Yeah, so simplistic that you can reason out. When you reason the equilibrium, a complex structure that a human person, it's impossible. You don't know where to start. You don't know how to. But if you get a simplistic diagram, and the more simplistic, the better, because you can tell that this diagram is not associated with anything the person has felt before. And that is very important in the process of learning conscious guidance and control. This is where models are important. Then from there, well, you can refine your model. Of course, here is a model that is totally refined compared, but it's still a system that is based on the inverted pendulum system. It's you can imagine a pendulum with different levels, like a rocket. You know, a rocket has level 1, level 2, level 3. We can imagine the same thing. Even the torso can be represented as a two-stage pendulum, which is a little pendulum at the top and a much larger pendulum. And so we don't want the torso to function as a single pendulum. If the torso functions as a simple pendulum, that's very simple. When the person is falling back, you will find that the person tends to fall back with the whole torso orientated, and she's protecting the fall by having the pelvis go the other way. So complex models, but still we are playing with equilibrium and with balance. Still, we are when a person is leaning forward, yes. We still have the problem of maintaining equilibrium before addressing the movements of single parts. We have been drilled into thinking of parts, in concentrating, in thinking, okay, neck free, head forward. So one part has to be made correct, or the movement has to be thought, or some sort of intelligence inside myself is going to take over and have my head forward and up, for example. Well, in the Alexander technique, as I teach it, you must understand that any movements of the parts is in fact secondary. The first thing is equilibrium. When you lean, equilibrium is the problem. Yes, and Alexander has a very strange idea of how to control the back, going back when you lean. He says that if you get and bend your knees first, yes, then what will happen is that in space, your back is going to move forward in space. Yeah. So if you want to go back, which is an old expression that Alexander was using, the expression back means that, of course, you're not releasing the ankle first. Our habit of leaning is associated with leaning at the pivot. And we can start the whole process by saying, what would happen of our reaction if we were to bend the knee at the hips and knees? That's what how Alexander explained leaning, bending the legs at the hips and knees. And I started to be interested by this way of speaking. Not in the first place, the first time I read the book, the first 1,000 times I read the books, I didn't see anything. But suddenly, as I translated the book, I started to compare when he was talking about something and when he was talking about the same thing somewhere else, and starting to compare what he was saying. And then it came to me that when he's talking about leaning forward, which is for us a strange expression we use. So for the Alexander community, we use an expression of monkey. We say it's like going into monkey. It's like a derisive way, but it's not in any way racist or anything like that. It was just a time when they didn't think about racism. They were racist, all of them. So how could they think of racism? You can only think of racism when you have in front of you another community that is going to, well, give you a mirror image of what it is you're doing. So when he's talking about going into monkey, he's talking about bending the legs at the hips and knees. And when he's talking about standing up from a chair, for example, the example is very clear. He says extending the legs at the hips, knees, and ankle. So suddenly there is bending the knee at the hips, knees, and ankle, extending the knee at the 3 joints. And using 2 joints as hinges is very different. It's that you decide that the person is not going to bend the ankle. So this gentleman is starting to, well, experiment with that. He is instructed that is going to lean without leaving the back of the knee going forward, so they are touching the chair. As long as he's touching the chair, he knows he's performing the new game. This game is only for involving equilibrium, really. It will. And so the person will find that when he's leaning going back, fine. But there is something that we note is that when he's leaning in the way he does, he's projecting the middle torso quite far forward. Let's be clear. We want the upper torso to be projected forward. Yes, but that then does not imply that we want to project the middle torso forward. And so the lower part of the sternum is here indicated. The armpit line is the yellow line. And so I'm asking the person to see whether he could, in fact, imagine another reaction. When he's told to go into monkey, could he in fact, maintain the same distance between the wall and the ankle that the wall and the lower sternum, which is absolutely not the case in this image. And so the person will discover that his equilibrium is involved. Why is he going so far forward and this other gentleman that has had more lesson is not? In the same, well, the conditions are even more drastic in this one because there is a chair between the wall and the knee, and we know that the distance of the front of the chair to the wall is the ruler distance because we have done the calculation just before starting the procedure. So in this image, that young gentleman cannot move the knees forward. He can bend the knee and bend the hip exactly as requested by Alexander, but he cannot bend the ankle. No way. So this is only possible if you discover a new sense of equilibrium. If you, in fact, refuse to accept your habitual sense of equilibrium, that says that you're falling backward. I can tell you the feeling of falling backward is at first really incredible. It's very difficult not to believe it. The person says, I am falling backward. And of course, as his habits of feeling backward. The whole gesture is associated with lifting the shoulders, with shortening the muscle of the neck. Of course, he's pulling the neck back. Of course, he's unduly lifting the front part of the chest. And you even see something that you would imagine you would see only in elderly people. You know, elderly people very often break their legs. And there is a reaction that is associated with this movement. It's called a parachute reaction. Why is it a parachute reaction? Because it's found that 99% of the elderly people that break their legs are lifting the arms in the air as if they wanted to hold a parachute. As there is no parachute, you must understand that lifting the arm in the air has a tendency to bring the shoulder further back than before and accelerate the fall backward. So the reaction that the person is showing is exactly opposite to the idea of protection. The habitual reaction of lifting the toes, of lifting the arm, is not conducive to maintaining postures and maintaining safety. It's all the opposite. So it is absolutely necessary if you want to change your use of the self, to realize that postural questions, which is what equilibrium is about, are primary. Even before you start releasing anything, you must first confront and discover what is your habitual equilibrium sense doing to you, meaning by that the decisions that are taken subconsciously are not to your benefit. It's very interesting to discover. It's a moment when you discover that you need reason, you need reasoning with models in order to develop your capacity of use. It's not through a model in which you feel something, and from what you feel, you suddenly it's because you're expanding your capacity of feeling. Absolutely not. It's the opposite. Conscious guidance and control is based on the exact opposite, on the range of the mind possibilities. You can immerse your mind into feelings, supposedly good feelings provided by specialists. And I say supposedly because I don't believe this idea that you can learn coordination of complex structures with feelings. And so we see that a training in conscious guidance and control will leave the person in capacity to perform actions. And these actions, by the way, I've always been told that, well, very often been told that this is absolutely unnatural. And this idea is not the Alexander idea that the knees should go forward in a way. I agree with the instruction, which is an instruction that is preventive in nature. Knees forward and away does not mean a movement of the knees forward and away. It means, in fact, an opposition of movement with the back. Knees forward and away in itself means nothing. What we are interested in is getting the maximum length between the back and the knees. That is absolutely correct. And it's only possible to obtain it if you can have two different pulls, opposing pulls, one for the back to go back, one for the knees to go forward and away. This is clear. But the movement of the knees forward makes no sense. And when you look at a professional golfer, you suddenly discover that, well, there is nothing unnatural in the idea of bending the knee and the hips, yes, and refusing to bend the ankle. If you want the calf to be in silent mode, it's exactly what you do. If you get your knees forward, the calf and the calf elastic group are going to be stretched and are going to start to, in fact, pull you back, which we don't want, and especially when you're going to hit with a long club with maximum force. So there is nothing wrong into establishing models. There is the capacity to create new experiments and to start to discover very simple ideas that are fundamental for the organization of movements. I will finish on this. For example, I want to explain what you see on screen. Of course, there are many things that I've added to the photograph, but there are things that are present. There is the gentleman is holding a book on his abdomen. Well, he's holding a book on the lower part of the rib cage and the upper part of the pelvis, on the bony parts. And as you can see, he's pressing the books back, but he's got a ruler in his hand, and I'm asking him to show me a 90-degree angle between the book and the ruler. I want to have him imagine that when we say that we pull something back, Let's say you have well, a general thing is back. So you have the front of the iliac and the lower rib cage that are directed backward. This gentleman is making a conscious decision that when he's going to lean back, he's going to pull back. Well, you must define back. Most people do not realize that when we say forward and back, it must be relatively to something. Of course, if you were always upright, like a person that is constructing doors or constructing houses, has just one idea of forward and back. Forward and back is 90 degrees to the vertical of gravity. Fine. But when we are discussing the movements of complex structures, you must understand that when you direct something back, is it back and up? Is it back and down? Or is it back horizontal? Yes, but what is back what is horizontal? Well, you must understand that in these lessons, in order for the movement to be performed with sufficient mathematical precision, it's necessary for the person to understand what we mean by pulling forward and up, or pulling back. And so this was a moment when I was explaining to that person that he should, in fact, use geometrical directions. And so that when we say we want the iliac to go back in leaning, we talk about a calculation. The direction back is not the same when you're standing and when you're leaning. You have to calculate a back that is 90 degrees to the front plane of the torso. This adds to the person's capacity to control his own movements. At first, of course, the pupil is not aware that it adds to his capacity, but very soon he will discover that it's this kind of precision, this kind of accuracy in thinking is absolutely necessary to obtain what it is we want, which is the capacity to lengthen and widen the back in any activity. So the model of new equilibrium has to be discovered, but we need tools to discover that model, to discover that new equilibrium. And the tools are how we can use language in order to create and use models. That is the idea that is behind conscious guidance and control.
Thank you, Jeando. Yes. Sometimes you hear people use two words interchangeably. So can you give people a definition? What is the difference between equilibrium and balance?
The main difference is linguistic. In fact, there are two words, one in Latin and one in Greek. And one is Greek and the other is Latin, but the meaning is more or less the same.
Okay.
So the meaning, now the meaning of is not clear. The meaning of equilibrium in mechanics is the idea that you are playing a game of a scale. You understand that there are possibilities to use mass, which is weight, if you want, to use weight and speed and movement, and balance around a pivot, in fact, to opposite objects. And when you strike this balance, you have equilibrium. So equilibrium is as well a state. In equilibrium is the possibility of going to movement in any direction. So for example, if you are standing, you could fall either forward, backward, or to the sides. This is equilibrium. You will find that most people standing posture is not equilibrium. It's not balanced because there are too many momenta, too much weight on one side of the pivot from at the starting point. The person is already falling somewhere. So there is another word that is also necessary to know. It's poise. poise is used in the Alexander technique. It's used in the Delsart system too. And the definition of poise is the same. It's again, the capacity to organize the movement in such a way as to be capable of starting a new movement in any direction. That's you could call equilibrium freedom of movement, and you could call equilibrium the opposite of stability. Stability is the capacity to resist being moved in one direction or another. We are not interested. We are interested in equilibrium. Equilibrium is the capacity to reason out how to organize the disposition of the different moving parts which have weights.
Excellent. Okay, that's clear. Okay? Yeah, thank you, Jeando. So for people watching the video, you will find a link underneath where you can go to book a lesson with Jeando. And if anyone has any questions, let us know and we can answer them in the videos. So thank you, Jeando.
Thank you, Kevin.
See you in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.